"Ma'am, are you sure you're in the right place?" The salesman said it with a smile, but his eyes had already taken in her dark skin, the gray hoodie, and the worn running shoes, deciding before she opened her mouth that she didn't belong here. She walked past him anyway, straight to the Mercedes GLE 450 in obsidian black, exactly what she had come for. That's when he made the call. A short while later, a police officer walked through the glass doors of Langston Luxury Motors on Westfield Boulevard in Atlanta. He looked at the showroom floor filled with white customers browsing, salesmen in suits, and one black woman standing next to a luxury vehicle. He didn't ask questions. He walked straight to her, grabbed her wrist, and snapped the handcuffs shut, right there in the middle of the showroom, under the bright lights, in front of everyone. A cashier's check for the full amount sat in her pocket, made out to the dealership. She had come to buy the car. Nobody intervened. Nobody spoke. Until the front door opened again, and the man who walked in, quiet and unhurried in a plain polo shirt and khaki pants, was about to change everything. Drop your city in the comments right now and stay with this story, because the woman in those handcuffs never once begged, and that's exactly why it matters. The alarm on Colonel Maya Lennox's phone went off early one Saturday morning, and for the first time in months, she didn't have to be anywhere. No briefing, no rounds, no trauma bay waiting, with its fluorescent lights and the particular kind of controlled chaos that had defined every waking hour of her life since she arrived at the military medical center in Germany the previous fall. No young soldier on the table in front of her, bleeding in ways that required her hands to stay steady, even when everything inside her was screaming. Just a Saturday morning in Atlanta. Sunlight came through the curtains of her mother's spare bedroom. The smell of coffee drifted up the stairs. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting herself feel the quiet. It was a strange sensation, the absence of urgency. After months of existing in a state of permanent readiness, her body didn't quite know what to do with peace. Her mind kept reaching for the next task, the next crisis, the next decision that couldn't wait. She had to consciously tell herself each morning of this leave that the work was done, that she had earned this, that she was allowed to simply breathe. Colonel Maya Lennox was 38 years old, a colonel in the United States Army and chief of trauma surgery at one of the most demanding military medical centers in the world. The facility received the most critically wounded American service members from conflicts across Europe and the Middle East. In recent months alone, she had performed or supervised hundreds of surgical procedures. Many of those patients arrived with injuries her civilian colleagues would have called unsurvivable. She had saved nearly all of them. She had grown up in Atlanta, the daughter of a retired school teacher and a man who drove delivery trucks 6 days a week and never once complained. She had been the first in her family to attend college, the first to attend West Point, the first to pin the eagle on her shoulder. Her mother, Evelyn Lennox, had framed every promotion photo and hung them in a neat row down the hallway of the house on Peachtree Circle. That gallery told the story of a woman who had spent 2 decades proving that the space she occupied was hers by right, not by permission. But this morning, Maya wasn't a colonel. She wasn't a surgeon. She was a daughter, and she had a plan. Her mother's 70th birthday was approaching. Evelyn Lennox had spent decades driving the same 12-year-old Honda, its driver's side window sticking in cold weather, its check engine light glowing steadily for years. She had never complained. She had never asked for anything beyond what her daughter could reasonably provide. That was exactly why Maya had spent the last few years setting aside every deployment allowance, every overseas pay supplement, every bonus into a savings fund she had quietly labeled in her banking app as Mom's car. The total was enough. The car she had chosen after weeks of research on a military laptop between shifts was a Mercedes-Benz GLE 450. Obsidian black exterior, macchiato beige interior, The AMG line package added the sport suspension and 20-inch alloy wheels her mother would never know the name of but would feel every time she pulled out of the driveway. The price was right. What remained would cover tax, title, registration, a full tank of gas, and a bow large enough to be embarrassing. Langston Luxury Motors on Westfield Boulevard was the only dealership in Atlanta with the exact configuration in stock. Maya dressed simply in a gray hoodie, dark jeans, and white running shoes. She wasn't going to a military function. She wasn't reporting for duty. She was running an errand on her day off the way any 38-year-old woman might. She tucked the sealed envelope into the front pocket of her hoodie. Inside was a personal check made out to Langston Luxury Motors for the full amount and a printed copy of the vehicle configuration she had confirmed by phone the afternoon before. She kissed her mother on the cheek, told her she would be back before long, and pulled out of the driveway in her Honda Accord. The drive didn't take long. She pulled into the lot at Langston Luxury Motors on a Saturday morning. The dealership was impressive, even from the outside. A 3-story glass and steel structure that caught the morning light and threw it back in every direction. Dozens of vehicles filled the floor. A sizable staff moved about. She parked, checked the envelope once more, and walked through the front doors. The showroom smelled like new leather and money. Soft music played from invisible speakers. Polished concrete floors stretched beneath vehicles displayed on raised platforms like sculptures in a gallery. Several salesmen stood near the reception desk. One was on the phone. One typed at a computer. One did nothing at all. None of them moved toward her. She stood just inside the entrance long enough for all three to register her presence, long enough for the one doing nothing to meet her eyes, hold the look for a moment, and then deliberately look back down at his phone. She had been in combat zones where the hostility was more honest than this. She walked toward the GLE 450 at the back of the floor. Obsidian, black. Exactly as specified. Somewhere behind her, a salesman named Logan Pierce finally set his phone down and started walking in her direction. Logan Pierce had worked at Langston Luxury Motors for several years. In that time, he had developed what he privately thought of as an instinct. He couldn't have explained it in writing. He certainly couldn't have defended it before a human resources panel, but in the practiced, self-congratulatory logic of his own mind, it was simply a professional skill. The ability to read a customer within the first moments and decide whether the person represented a genuine sale or a waste of time. He was in his late 20s, drove a leased car, wore slim-cut suits from a mid-range department store, and had perfected a handshake that communicated confidence without trying too hard. He had been one of the dealership's top performers, a fact he mentioned more often than anyone around him found comfortable. His instinct ran on a simple calculus he would never admit aloud. Who looked like money? And more specifically, who looked like the kind of money that belonged here? When Maya Lennox walked through the doors that Saturday morning, Logan's instinct made its assessment in seconds. Dark skin, gray hoodie, worn running shoes, an older Honda visible through the glass behind her. No jewelry beyond small stud earrings. No designer bag. No visible markers of the wealth this showroom was built to serve. He slipped his phone into his jacket pocket and crossed the floor toward her. Not with urgency, but with the particular unhurried condescension he had mistaken for professionalism. "Morning," he said, stopping a few feet short of where she stood. He did not extend his hand. "Can I help you find something?" "I'm looking at this one," Maya said. She didn't look at him. She was reading the spec sheet on the driver's side window. Logan glanced at the GLE 450 AMG line, one of the more expensive vehicles on the floor, then back at her. "That's a beautiful car," he said. And in those 5 words he managed to convey that he did not believe she was there to buy it. "Are you looking for yourself? Or is this more of a browsing situation?" Maya turned and looked at him for the first time. "I'm buying it," she said simply. Logan smiled his polished, professional smile. "Of course. Well, we do have financing options that can make our inventory more accessible. I could walk you through some numbers and see what kind of monthly payment works for your situation. I'm not financing, Maya said. I'm paying cash. A small pause. Logan recalibrated, not enough to change his posture or tone, but enough to shift the angle slightly. Cash is great. Do you have documentation of funds? It's standard procedure for vehicles at this price point. We ask for verification before a test drive. It was not standard procedure. Elena Vargas, watching from behind the reception desk with a ceramic mug of coffee going cold in her hands, knew it was not standard procedure. She had worked at the dealership for years and had never seen Logan ask a white customer for proof of funds before a test drive. Not once. But she said nothing. She looked down at her desk. Maya reached into her hoodie pocket, produced the sealed envelope, opened it, and held out the personal check. Logan took it. He looked at the amount. A tiny shift moved across his jaw, a fractional tightening, and then he handed it back. This is a personal check, he said. For a transaction of this size, we typically prefer certified funds, a cashier's check or wire transfer. I can have a cashier's check here within the hour, Maya said. The funds are available. I confirmed the vehicle by phone yesterday afternoon. Right, Logan said. With who? A woman named Sandra in your sales department. Logan nodded slowly, the way someone nods when they are not truly absorbing the information. I'll need to verify that, and we'd also need a credit check on file before we can proceed, regardless of payment method. Again, standard for vehicles at this tier. Maya looked at him with a long, steady gaze. She had spent years reading rooms and reading people, identifying threats before they fully materialized. What she saw in Logan Pierce's face was not policy. It was not procedure. It was the particular discomfort of a man confronting a reality that did not match the story he had already written in his mind. I'd like to speak with your manager, she said. Logan's smile did not waver. Of course. Let me just give me one moment. He walked toward the back corridor, unhurried, the soles of his dress shoes tapping evenly on the polished concrete. He pushed through the door, marked staff only. Elena Vargas watched him go. She set down her coffee. Something was wrong. She had felt it gathering since the moment he crossed the floor, and she did not yet know what to do about it. In the narrow staff corridor, Logan was not looking for the manager. He was pulling out his phone, scrolling to a number, pressing call. The line picked up on the second ring. Yeah, he said quietly, his back to the door. I need you to send someone over to the showroom. We've got a situation. He didn't say suspicious activity. Not yet. But the word was already forming behind his teeth. And once it left his mouth, nothing in that showroom would ever be the same. The staff corridor smelled of printer toner and stale coffee. Logan stood at the far end, voice low and deliberate. The person on the other end was the dispatch operator for the Atlanta Police Department's Zone 5. Logan had called them before in his years at the dealership. Once when a teenager leaned against a vehicle too long. Once when two men he didn't recognize spent too much time looking at a truck on the outdoor lot. Both times an officer had arrived. Both times the individuals had left. Both times Logan had written the outcome in his private mental ledger under instinct confirmed. He chose his words carefully now. We've got a suspicious individual on the showroom floor. Female. She's been handling one of our higher-end vehicles and she doesn't appear to be a legitimate customer. I'm concerned she may be casing the inventory. The dispatcher asked for a description. Black female, mid-30s maybe. Gray hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Arrived in an older model Honda. The dispatcher confirmed a unit would be sent. Logan thanked her, slipped the phone back into his pocket, straightened his jacket, and pushed back through the door into the showroom. Maya was still standing beside the GLE 450. She had opened the driver's side door, unlocked like all display vehicles, and was examining the interior. She ran one hand along the leather of the steering wheel. She was not frantic. She was not hurried. She moved with the careful, methodical attention of someone who knew exactly what she was looking for and was confirming it against a mental checklist. Logan crossed the floor and stopped a few feet away. "Ma'am, I'd ask that you not handle the vehicle without a sales associate present." Maya looked at him. "You are the sales associate," she said, "and I asked to speak with a manager." "She's in a call right now. It shouldn't be long." He glanced toward the front doors. "Nothing yet. Why don't we move over to the consultation area? I can get you some water while you wait." Maya closed the car door. She did not move toward the consultation area. She leaned against the side of the vehicle, arms folded, and waited. Elena Vargas had come out from behind the reception desk. She was straightening a rack of brochures near the front of the showroom, which put her roughly 15 feet from Maya and gave her a direct sightline to the front doors. She wasn't really straightening brochures. She was watching. Her stomach had been tight since the moment Logan walked into that corridor with his phone already out. In her years at the dealership, she had learned to trust that particular tightening. She saw the patrol car before anyone else did. It pulled up to the curb outside without lights or sirens. A standard white and blue Atlanta Police Department cruiser parked directly in front of the dealership entrance. The driver's side door opened. Officer Reed Harlan stepped out. He was broad-shouldered and moved with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never had reason to question whether a room would accommodate him. He adjusted his duty belt as he approached the entrance, a small, habitual gesture, and pushed through the glass doors. The showroom received him the way showrooms receive police officers. A slight recalibration. White customers glanced up, registered the uniform, and returned to what they were doing. The salesman at the reception desk straightened, almost imperceptibly. Elena Vargas stopped pretending to sort brochures. Harlan didn't sweep the room the way a cautious officer might. He had been given a description over dispatch, and his eyes went directly and immediately to the black woman, standing beside the Mercedes at the back of the showroom. He walked toward her. He did not stop at the reception desk. He did not speak to Logan, who now stood near the consultation area with his hands clasped in front of him. He did not ask a single question of anyone before he closed the distance between himself and Maya Lennox. "Ma'am," his voice was flat and official. "Step away from the vehicle. I need to speak with you." Maya turned to face him. She took one step away from the car, not because she was startled, but because she was careful about eliminating variables. She kept her hands visible at her sides. "Is there a problem, officer?" "We received a call about a suspicious individual were on the premises. I need you to come with me and answer a few questions." "What am I suspected of?" Harlan's jaw tightened slightly. He was not accustomed to the question being returned so quickly and so calmly. "We received a report of—" "I'm a customer," Maya said. Her voice was even and unhurried, and it carried just far enough to reach the nearest cluster of white shoppers who had stopped moving. "I have been attempting to purchase a vehicle. If there is a specific crime I am suspected of committing, I would like to know what it is." Harlan looked at her for a moment, then looked at Logan. Logan gave the smallest possible nod, barely a tilt of the chin. It was enough. "Ma'am," Harlan said, "I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back." The showroom went completely still. Nobody moved, not the white couple examining the Range Rover 2 platforms over who had turned at the sound of Harlan's voice and now stood frozen with a brochure between them. Not the elderly man near the front who had been asking a salesman about financing options and had simply stopped mid-sentence. Not the young woman with the stroller who had wandered in off the street to use the restroom and now stood at the edge of the showroom floor with her hand on the handle, watching. Elena Vargas stood by the brochure rack with both hands flat against her thighs. She could feel her own pulse in her fingertips. Maya Lennox did not turn around. She stood facing Officer Reed Harlan with her hands still visible at her sides and her shoulders straight, not with defiance, not with aggression, but with the particular stillness of a woman who had spent years operating in environments where losing control of your body language could cost someone their life. In the trauma bay, in the field, in every room that had ever tried to make her smaller than she was. She had learned that composure was not the absence of feeling. It was the mastery of it. "Officer," she said, "I have not committed a crime. I came to this dealership to purchase a vehicle. I have a cashier's check in my pocket made out to Langston Luxury Motors for the full purchase price. I would ask you to please verify that before taking any further action." "Ma'am, this is not a request. Turn around. I'm asking you to verify. Turn around, now." There was a man near the back of the showroom, in his mid-40s, wearing a Georgia Tech sweatshirt and waiting for his wife, who was in the restroom. He had already pulled out his phone. He held it at waist height, screen facing up, recording. He didn't announce it. He didn't make a scene. He simply pressed the button and kept very still, letting the camera see what his eyes were seeing. Maya looked at Harlan for one long, measured second. She was performing a calculation, not of escape, not of resistance, but of damage. She was a trauma surgeon. She understood triage. She understood that some battles were not won in the moment they were fought, and that surviving the moment intact was sometimes the only victory available. She turned around slowly, hands coming up. The handcuffs came from Harlan's belt, with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this many times. The metal was cold. The first cuff closed around her left wrist with a clean mechanical click that seemed to travel across the showroom floor and reach every person in the building at exactly the same moment. The second cuff followed. Maya Lennox stood in the middle of Langston Luxury Motors on Westfield Boulevard in Atlanta on a Saturday morning in handcuffs. She did not cry. She did not struggle. She did not make a sound. She looked straight ahead at the far wall of the showroom where a large illuminated sign read, "Langston Luxury Motors, where excellence meets you." She read it once. She read it again. She focused on the letters the way she had once focused on the second hand of a clock in a recovery room in Kandahar, when her hands were shaking after a long surgery, and she needed them to stop. The envelope in her front hoodie pocket pressed against her chest. Inside it, the check for the full amount. The funds she had built dollar by dollar over years of deployment allowance, every overseas supplement and every bonus that had passed through her account, while she was saving lives in a building outside Stuttgart. She had written her mother's name in the memo line. For Evelyn, happy birthday. Logan Pierce stood near the consultation table with his arms crossed and his chin slightly elevated. He had the expression of a man who believed he had handled the situation correctly. Elena Vargas looked at Logan. Then she looked at Maya. Then she looked at the floor. She pressed her lips together and said nothing. She had said nothing the first time. She had said nothing the second time. She had built a very efficient internal architecture of silence over her years there, brick by brick, and she was standing inside it now, and it had never felt as small or as suffocating as it did at this moment. The man in the Georgia Tech sweatshirt kept recording. Two other customers had their phones out now. A young black woman near the entrance had both hands wrapped around hers, knuckles tight, jaw set, recording without blinking. An older white man in a blazer stood with his device raised openly, not hiding it, making no effort to be discreet. Harlan noticed the phones. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not remorse, not doubt, but the specific awareness of a man who has just understood that there are witnesses. He straightened slightly. He placed one hand on Maya's arm above the elbow and said with the performative calm of someone who was now aware of an audience, "I'm going to need you to come with me outside, ma'am." "I'm not going anywhere," Maya said. Her voice was quiet and level. It did not shake. "I am standing in this building because I have the legal right to be here. I have committed no crime, and I am not leaving without documentation of why I am being detained." Harlan tightened his grip on her arm, and then, in the particular silence that had settled over the showroom, like a held breath, the front door opened. The bell above it chimed softly. A man in a white polo shirt and khaki pants stepped inside. He was in his early 60s. He was not tall in the way that draws attention. He was not loud. He carried no visible authority, wore no visible rank, projected none of the theatrical dominance that Harlan carried in his uniform and duty belt and practiced hands. He simply stood in this doorway for a moment, taking in the room, and then his eyes found Maya. General Everett Langston had not planned to come in that Saturday. He had planned to spend the morning at his kitchen table with a second cup of coffee and the sports section of the newspaper, which he still received in print, because he was in his 60s and had earned the right to read news on paper if he wanted to. He had planned to drive out to his daughter's house by midday for lunch, then spend the afternoon doing nothing in particular, a skill he had been attempting to develop since his retirement from the United States Army a few years earlier, with limited success. He had stopped by the dealership on impulse. He did that sometimes on weekends, not to check on the staff, not to review numbers, but simply because the building was his and he felt at home in it in the uncomplicated way that people feel at home in places they built with intention. He had purchased the original lot on Westfield Boulevard years ago, with the proceeds from his first real estate investment and a loan he had paid back in good time. He had overseen the construction of the current 3-story structure himself, had chosen the concrete for the floors and the grade of the glass for the facade and the temperature of the lighting because he believed that the environment a business created told people before a single word was spoken exactly how much it valued them. He had built this place to tell people they were valued. He parked his personal vehicle, a several-year-old Chevrolet Suburban, in the rear lot, which was why no one at the front desk had seen him coming. He came through the staff entrance, nodded to a technician he recognized from the service department, and walked through the interior corridor toward the showroom floor. He heard the stillness before he saw the cause of it. There was a particular quality to silence in a busy public space, the way it announced itself by contrast, the way a room full of people, who have all stopped talking at once, communicated without a single word that something had happened that none of them knew how to respond to. General Everett Langston had spent decades in the United States Army and had learned to read that quality of silence the way other men read weather. He pushed through the interior door and stepped onto the showroom floor. He saw the police officer first, broad-shouldered, hand on a woman's arm, positioned between her and the exit. Then he saw the customers. Frozen, phones raised, a collection of people who had come in to look at cars and were now witnesses to something that had nothing to do with cars. He saw Logan Pierce standing near the consultation table with his arms crossed and his chin up. Then he saw Maya. The recognition arrived in his chest before it reached his mind. The specific gut-level recognition of a face he had known for 20 years. He saw the handcuffs. He saw the envelope-shaped outline pressing against the front pocket of her hoodie. He saw the way she was standing, spine straight, eyes forward, that particular composure he had watched her develop from a 19-year-old plebe at West Point into one of the finest officers he had ever had the privilege of knowing. And he understood immediately and completely what had happened in his building. He did not hurry. Hurrying communicated alarm, and alarm communicated that the situation required alarm, and this situation required something different. It required the specific gravity-laden calm of a man who has never once needed to prove that the ground beneath his feet belonged to him. He walked across the showroom floor, past the couple with the brochure, past the elderly man who had stopped mid-sentence, past the young woman with the stroller. His footsteps were quiet on the polished concrete, and the room tracked him, heads turning, people stepping back slightly, creating a path without being asked. He stopped several feet from Officer Reed Harlan, the receptionist at the front desk, a young man who had started only months earlier and was still learning the hierarchy of the building, had risen halfway out of his chair without realizing it. He recognized the man who had just crossed the floor. He had seen him in photographs on the wall of the general manager's office and in the framed article from the Business Chronicle above the water cooler. He sat back down and said nothing. Harlan heard the shift in the room before he consciously registered it. He turned. He saw a man in a white polo shirt and khaki pants, early 60s, silver hair short and neat, unremarkable build. Nothing that the practiced eye of a veteran would flag as a threat or an authority. He released Maya's arm, not because he felt commanded to, but because the movement was reflexive. A small, automatic concession to the fact that someone was now standing close enough to be a participant. "Sir, Harlan said, I'm going to need you to step back. This is an active situation," Langston said. The word was quiet, almost gentle. It stopped Harlan mid-sentence, not because of its volume, but because of its texture. Because it carried within it the absolute absence of uncertainty, and uncertainty was the one thing Harlan had been relying on to control this situation from the moment he walked through the door. "I need you to tell me exactly what you believe this woman has done." Harlan straightened. "We received a call about a suspicious individual. This woman matches the description provided by a staff member. She refused to—" "What is her name?" Langston asked. Harlan paused. The caller described." "Do you know her name?" "No, sir. Her name," Langston said, "is Colonel Maya Lennox, United States Army." He let that sit in the air for exactly 1 second. "And I think you should hear the rest of what I have to say before you decide what happens next." The showroom had gone the kind of quiet that has weight to it, not the polite quiet of a business conducting itself in a measured, professional manner, not the anticipatory quiet of people waiting for a transaction to conclude. This was the held-breath quiet of people who understood at some instinctive and collective level that what was happening in front of them was not ordinary. That the man in the white polo shirt had just said something in a tone that carried no heat whatsoever, that had nonetheless fundamentally altered the temperature of the room. Officer Reed Harlan looked at General Everett Langston. He performed in the space of a few seconds the same kind of rapid assessment he had been trained to perform at the scene of an incident. Age early 60s, build unremarkable, clothing casual, no visible identifiers, demeanor calm to the point of being unusual. None of it matched the internal profile that Harlan had built over his years for the category of person whose instructions he felt compelled to follow. That category was populated by people in uniforms, people behind desks with titles on placards, people whose authority was visible and legible and immediately verifiable. This man wore a polo shirt and khakis and spoke with the unhurried certainty of someone who had never once needed a visible credential. Harlan's jaw set. "Sir, I appreciate you sharing that, but unless you have documentation verifying this individual's identity and your relationship to her, I need you to step back and allow me to complete." "I own this building," Langston said. The sentence was short. It was not delivered with emphasis. It was delivered the way one might state a fact about the weather, because it was simply true, and the truth of it required no performance. Harlan blinked. "Sir, every vehicle on this floor, every square foot of this structure, the lot outside, the signage, the service bays in the back." Langston looked around the showroom once briefly, the way a man looks at something he has looked at thousands of times and still finds familiar. "I built this dealership years ago. My name is on the deed, the business license, and the sign above the door you walked through this morning." He returned his gaze to Harlan. "And the woman you have placed in handcuffs is a decorated colonel in the United States Army who came here today to purchase a vehicle with a cashier's check that is currently sitting in her pocket." Logan Pierce, standing near the consultation table, had uncrossed his arms sometime in the last 30 seconds without noticing. His hands were now at his sides and he was very still. Harlan looked at Maya, then back at Langston. The architecture of his confidence was not collapsing. It was something more specific than that. It was reconfiguring. He was a man who had operated for years inside a structure that rewarded certainty, and certainty required that the variables in front of him resolve into a recognizable pattern. What was in front of him now refused to resolve. A black woman in handcuffs who had not once raised her voice. a silver-haired man in casual clothing who spoke like every room he had ever entered had been waiting for him. A showroom full of people with phones raised. He made the choice that men who cannot tolerate uncertainty almost always make. He escalated. "Sir, I understand your position, but I am responding to a lawful call regarding suspicious behavior reported by a staff member of this establishment. Regardless of the identity of the individual in question, I am required to complete my investigation before I can—" "You were told," Langston said, and for the first time there was something beneath the calm. Not anger, but the thing that precedes anger, in men who have spent decades learning to keep it below the surface, by an employee acting on bias that a black woman in a gray hoodie was suspicious. You came in, you looked at her, and you put her in handcuffs. That is the complete chain of events. There is no investigation. There is no evidence. There is a black woman standing in my dealership, in restraints, because she had the misfortune of trying to buy a car on a Saturday morning. The room did not move. Harlan's hand had drifted without his full conscious awareness toward his duty belt. Not toward his weapon, toward the radio on his left shoulder, the gesture of a man reaching for reinforcement. "General," he stopped himself. He hadn't meant to use the word. It had arrived unbidden, slipped out of the part of his brain that had been processing the room, and had silently, reluctantly begun to fill in the blanks. Langston noticed. He let it pass. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Langston said. "Remove the restraints from Colonel Lennox." "I can't do that until I've completed." "You can," Langston said, "and you will. Because in a short while, I am going to make a phone call, and the person on the other end of that call is going to tell you the same thing I'm telling you right now. Except that by then, the window for this to end quietly will have closed." Harlan looked at him, looked at Maya, looked at the phones raised around the room, looked at Logan, who had taken one small, almost imperceptible step backward toward the staff corridor. He made his decision. "I am not removing those restraints," he said. "I am following established protocol, and I will not be pressured to deviate from procedure by a civilian, regardless of—" Langston reached into the pocket of his khakis and produced his phone. He dialed. The phone rang twice. The sound was thin and small in the vast quiet of the showroom. 2 electronic pulses that seemed to reach every corner of the room and be heard by every person standing in it. The man in the Georgia Tech sweatshirt kept his phone at waist height, still recording. The young black woman near the entrance had not lowered hers. Neither had the older man in the blazer. 3 separate cameras, 3 separate angles, all of them capturing the same thing. General Everett Langston standing in the middle of his own dealership, dialing a number from memory, while a United States Army colonel stood several feet away in handcuffs. The line picked up on the second ring. "Langston!" The voice on the other end was female, professional, and carried the particular flatness of someone who had been doing their job long enough to have stopped being surprised by anything. "It's Saturday." "It is," Langston said. "Lena, I need you to pull up Officer Reed Harlan, Zone 5. Tell me what's in his file." A pause. The sound of a chair adjusting. Fingers moving to a keyboard. "Give me 30 seconds. Langston waited. He did not look at Harlan while he waited. He looked at Maya. A brief, direct look that communicated something wordless and precise. She gave the smallest possible nod in return. She was all right. She was still here. She was still standing. "Okay," the voice said. "Harlan Reed, several years on the force, multiple use of force complaints. All marked resolved internally. Signed off by Captain Raymond Holt." "Multiple," Langston repeated. He said it clearly at normal conversational volume, which meant everyone within earshot heard it. "All resolved internally. That's what it says. Lena, I need Harlan relieved of duty pending a full external review. I need Holt on the record explaining how multiple use of force complaints against the same officer were resolved without disciplinary action. And I need a formal incident report on what happened here at Langston Motors this morning." Time-stamped full detail filed before end of business today. There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Not hesitation. Processing. Understood, General. I'll have a supervisor unit there within 15 minutes. Thank you. He ended the call. He looked at Harlan. For the first time since Everett Langston had crossed the showroom floor, Reed Harlan looked uncertain. Not frightened, not yet, but the quality of his certainty had changed. It had developed a fissure. Small hairline, but visible to anyone paying attention, and everyone in that room was paying attention. That was Sergeant Lena Ortiz, your zone supervisor. She is sending a unit here to relieve you of duty pending a review of this incident and your prior use of force history. He paused. I'm making one more call. This one will take a little longer to explain. He dialed again. This time the phone rang 4 times before a man's voice answered. Unhurried, dry, with the faint edge of someone who has been interrupted but is too composed to say so.
Everett, it's Saturday.
I know what day it is, Julian. I need you to start drafting a civil rights complaint. Section 1983. Plaintiff is Colonel Maya Lennox, United States Army. The incident occurred this morning at my Westfield location. I'll send you the details within the hour, but the outline is straightforward. Unlawful detention, excessive force, racial discrimination in a place of public accommodation. How many witnesses? Langston looked around the room. He counted the raised phones. At least 3 recordings that I can see from where I'm standing. Probably more. I'll have a draft ready soon, the voice said. Tell Colonel Lennox I'm sorry this happened. Tell her yourself, Langston said. I'll have her call you. He ended the call and put the phone back in his pocket. He turned to Harlan. The fissure had widened. It was visible now, not just in his expression, but in his posture. A slight forward bend in the shoulders. A minute contraction around the jaw that communicated in the language of the human body that the ground had shifted, and the person standing on it had not yet decided how to respond to that. Officer Harlan, Langston said, I want to be clear about something before the supervisor unit arrives. He reached into the breast pocket of his polo shirt and produced a card, small and white, with the seal of the state of Georgia embossed in the upper left corner. He held it out. Harlan took it, looked at it, and went very still. The card identified Everett D. Langston as a member of the Georgia Law Enforcement Oversight Commission, the independent body empowered to review, investigate, and make binding recommendations on matters of police conduct across the state of Georgia. The complaints in your file, Langston said, are now the subject of a formal review. That review will be conducted by my commission, not by your precinct. Captain Holt's decisions will be part of that review. And this incident, he gestured briefly and precisely at Maya, at the handcuffs, at the room, will be at the center of it. Harlan's hand moved. It went to Maya's wrist, not with force, but with the mechanical motion of a man performing a task his body had already decided on before his mind had fully caught up. The first cuff opened, then the second. Maya lowered her arms slowly. She brought her hands in front of her and pressed the right thumb into the left palm. A motion so small and so practiced that only someone watching very carefully would have noticed it. Elena Vargas, watching from across the room, noticed it. She pressed her own hands flat against her thighs and looked at the floor and felt something shift in her chest that she did not yet have a name for. Logan Pierce had taken 2 steps toward the staff corridor. Langston looked at him. Don't, he said quietly. Logan stopped. There is a moment in certain kinds of confrontations, not the loud ones, not the ones conducted in raised voices and slammed doors, but the quiet ones, the ones where the power in the room shifts without anyone shouting, where the people who have been watching from the edges begin to understand that the outcome has already been decided, that the machinery has been set in motion, that what they are witnessing now is not the conflict itself, but the beginning of its resolution. And their only remaining choice is which side of it they want to be standing on when the dust clears. That moment arrived in the showroom of Langston Luxury Motors that Saturday morning. Elena Vargas felt it first. She had been standing near the brochure rack for the better part of half an hour, and in those 30 minutes, she had performed a very precise and very exhausting internal negotiation between two versions of herself. The version that had watched Logan Pierce make his call and said nothing. The version that had watched the handcuffs close and said nothing. The version that had built brick by careful brick a wall of professional silence because she had a mortgage and a daughter in college and a job she could not afford to lose. And the version that was still in there, somewhere. The version that had taken this job because she believed in the business. Believed in what the name above the door was supposed to mean. Believed that the man who had founded this company had built it to be something better than what she had watched it become in recent years, under Logan Pierce's particular brand of salesmanship. She walked to the reception desk. She sat down. She opened a drawer and took out a legal pad and a pen, and she began to write. She wrote the date and the time at the top of the page. She wrote Logan's name. She wrote the time of the phone call she had watched him make. She wrote the words he had used in the corridor. She had heard them through the door, and she had stored them in the part of her memory that saves things you know you will need later. She wrote the names and rough descriptions of every customer she could identify who had been present. She wrote the time Harlan arrived. She wrote the time the handcuffs were applied. Then she turned to a second page and began writing about the first time. The first time had been a couple of years earlier. A man named Dr. Reginald Foster. She had looked him up afterward. A cardiologist at Emory University Hospital, who had come in wearing scrubs because he had driven directly from a night shift. He had been interested in a Porsche Cayenne. Logan had steered him toward the used inventory. When Dr. Foster had asked to see the Cayenne anyway, Logan had asked for proof of funds. Dr. Foster had left. He had not come back. He had not filed a complaint. And Elena had not said anything, and the wall had gained its first brick. The second time had been more than a year ago. A woman whose exact name she could not remember, but she remembered the face, remembered the coat, remembered the way the woman had stood at the sales desk while Logan spoke to her with the particular patience of a man explaining something to someone he did not believe was capable of understanding it. The woman had left within 10 minutes. She had been looking at a BMW 7 Series. She had been wearing a coat that probably cost more than Logan's monthly salary. She had been black. Elena wrote it all down. Her handwriting was small and neat and very fast. Across the room, General Everett Langston had moved to stand beside Maya. He had not touched her shoulder, had not made any gesture that presumed what she needed from him. He simply stood close enough to be present, and far enough to give her room. "How are you doing?" he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm okay," she said. Then after a brief pause, "I'll be better once I have my morning back." Something moved through Langston's expression, brief and complex and quickly contained. "I owe you an apology. What happened in this building today?" "You didn't make the call," Maya said. "No, but it's my name on the door." She looked at him for a moment. "General," she said, and the word carried in it 20 years of history. The plebe year. The early mornings, the particular standard he had held every student in that classroom to, without exception or apology. The voice that had said rank is earned, not assumed, in a room full of 19-year-olds who were still learning what that meant. "You came in. That's what matters." He nodded once, then he turned and looked at Logan Pierce, who had not moved from the spot where Langston's single word had stopped him. Logan was 40-something days from his 5-year anniversary at the dealership. He had a lease on his car that ran for some time. He had been planning to ask for a raise at his annual review in a few weeks. He had spent years building a quiet, comfortable career on a foundation that had felt until approximately 20 minutes ago completely solid. He looked at General Everett Langston's face and understood with the specific and terrible clarity that arrives when a story you have been telling yourself for years suddenly ends, that the foundation was gone. "Logan," Langston said. His voice was not raised, it was not cold. It was something more final than either. It was the voice of a man stating a conclusion that had already been reached and did not require debate. My office. Now. Logan walked. His footsteps sounded very loud in the quiet. Elena Vargas turned to a third page on her legal pad and kept writing. And outside on Westfield Boulevard, a supervisor unit from Zone 5 was pulling to the curb. The supervisor unit parked at the curb outside a short while later. Through the tall glass facade of the showroom, Maya watched it arrive. She watched the driver's side door open and a woman step out, compact, purposeful, in full uniform, moving with the economy of motion that came from years of walking into situations that had already gone wrong. The woman paused at the entrance, took one broad visual sweep of the room, and came through the door. Sergeant Lena Ortiz was in her early 40s and had been with the Atlanta PD for many years. She had worked Zone 5 for the last several of those, and, in that time, she had developed a finely calibrated sense for the particular shape of a situation that had gotten away from everyone involved. She walked in, identified General Everett Langston by the photograph she had looked up on her phone during the short drive over, and crossed the floor toward him. She did not look at Harlan immediately. That was deliberate. She had learned a long time ago that looking at the officer first communicated the wrong thing. It told the room that the officer was still the center of gravity, still the authority, still the person around whom everything else organized itself. She looked at Langston first, then at Maya, then finally at Harlan. What she saw in his face told her most of what she needed to know. She had seen that expression before on younger officers, on officers who had made decisions in the field that felt correct in the moment and revealed themselves to be catastrophic in retrospect. The expression of a man who had committed to a direction and discovered too late that the ground in that direction had already fallen away. "Sergeant Ortiz," Langston said. "General?" She turned to Maya. "Ma'am, I'm Sergeant Lena Ortiz, Zone 5 Supervisor. I want to start by saying that what happened here this morning should not have happened. I'm sorry you experienced it in this building or anywhere else." Maya looked at her. She studied the woman's face, the way she studied everything, with the careful, unhurried attention of someone who had learned that the details most people overlooked were usually the ones that mattered most. She saw no performance in Ortiz's expression, no managed public relations. She saw a woman who meant what she said and was uncomfortable with the fact that she needed to say it. "Thank you," Maya said. It was the first thing she had said in several minutes that wasn't a legal assertion or a direct response to a threat. And the simplicity of it, the absence of anger, the absence of performance, the plain human acknowledgement of one woman by another, seemed to shift something in the room more quietly and more completely than anything that had come before it. Langston turned slightly toward Maya. "Are you all right?" She was quiet for a moment. Not because she didn't know the answer. She had known the answer since the handcuffs came off, and she had pressed her right thumb into her left palm and felt her own pulse, and confirmed that she was still, in all the ways that mattered, intact. She was quiet because she was deciding how much of the answer to give. "I've been through worse," she said finally. "That doesn't make this acceptable." "No," Langston said. "It doesn't." She looked down at her hands for a moment. The marks left by the cuffs were faint. She had kept her wrists relaxed because tensing against restraints only made them cut deeper. A thing she had learned not in any manual, but from a conversation with a Special Forces medic in a forward operating base who had been detained briefly at a checkpoint and had offered the advice as casually as he might offer directions. Small knowledge, the kind you accumulated in a life lived in uniform without ever intending to need it. "I want to tell you something," she said. She was speaking to Langston, but her voice carried clearly enough that Ortiz heard it, and the nearest customers heard it, and the man in the Georgia Tech sweatshirt, who had finally lowered his phone, but had not moved from his spot near the Range Rover, heard it. "I came here today to buy my mother a car," she said. "My mother is turning 70 soon. She has driven the same Honda for 12 years. She has never asked me for a single thing that she didn't believe I could reasonably give." I have been deployed for much of the last year and more. Germany, Poland, before that Afghanistan, before that Iraq. I am a trauma surgeon. I operate on people who are dying, and I try to make sure they don't. I have been doing that for 14 years. She paused, not for effect, to let the words settle into the accurate shape of the thing she was describing. I walked into this building this morning in a gray hoodie and jeans, because it is my day off and I'm allowed to look however I want on my day off. I had a check in my pocket. I had a car already picked out. I had a plan. She looked at Langston, and a man who works in your building looked at my skin and decided that none of that was possible. And a police officer looked at the same thing and decided the same thing. And I stood in handcuffs in front of every person in this room, because two men looking at a black woman in a gray hoodie reached the same conclusion, that I could not possibly belong here. The room was absolutely still. I want people to understand, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, that my dignity did not come from you walking through that door, General. I am grateful that you did. But my dignity was never theirs to take. I never gave it to them. Langston looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly, completely, the nod of a man receiving something true. Behind her, she heard Elena Vargas set down her pen. The general manager's office at Langston Luxury Motors was on the second floor, accessed by a glass staircase at the rear of the showroom. It had a view of the sales floor below and, through the window on the opposite wall, of the outdoor lot where the pre-owned inventory sat in clean, evenly spaced rows beneath the late morning sun. Logan Pierce stood in the middle of that office and did not sit down. He had not been invited to sit down. He stood with his hands at his sides and his weight distributed evenly between both feet in the unconscious stance of a man bracing for impact. General Everett Langston came through the door, a short while after Logan did. He did not close it behind him. He walked to the window that overlooked the sales floor, looked down at the room below, at Sergeant Ortiz, at Maya, at the customers who had not left, at Elena Vargas sitting straight-backed at the reception desk with a legal pad in front of her. And then he turned around. He looked at Logan the way certain men look at a thing they built with their own hands and have just discovered is broken. Not with rage. Not with the theatrical disappointment of someone performing an emotion for an audience. With the quiet, complete, and entirely unsentimental recognition of a problem that needed to be resolved. "Tell me what you told the dispatcher," Langston said. Logan's mouth opened. "General, I want to explain the situation from my perspective. I was acting on what I believe to be a legitimate concern about a potential—" "Tell me what you told the dispatcher," Langston said again. The repetition was not impatient. It was precise. Logan closed his mouth. He looked at the floor. "I said we had a suspicious individual, female, possibly casing the inventory." "Casing the inventory?" Langston repeated. She was standing next to a display vehicle that was unlocked for customer access, the same vehicle she had told you before you made the call that she intended to purchase. She didn't have proof of funds. She showed you a personal check for the full amount. Personal checks can be— Logan. The name landed like a full stop. I have been running this dealership for years. I have a policy. It is written into our training manual. It is covered in every onboarding session, and it is posted in the staff corridor on the same board where we list our monthly targets, that no customer is to be asked for proof of funds prior to a test drive, unless there is a documented reason specific to that transaction. There is no documented reason here. There is a black woman in a gray hoodie, and there is your decision." Logan said nothing. "How many times has this happened?" Langston asked. "I don't know what you—" "How many times have you called the police or security, or in any other way, acted to remove a customer from this floor, based on an assessment that had nothing to do with their behavior, and everything to do with how they looked?" The silence that followed was its own answer. Logan's eyes moved briefly to the left, the involuntary movement of a man performing a count he didn't want to perform in front of an audience. "I have documentation," said a voice from the doorway. Both men turned. Elena Vargas stood at the threshold of the open door, the legal pad held in both hands. Her posture carried the slightly rigid quality of someone who has made a decision and is moving forward on it before their nerve fails them. "I have documentation," she said again, "of this incident and of 2 prior incidents that I witnessed but did not report." She looked at Langston directly. "I should have reported them. I didn't, and I am sorry for that. I'm reporting them now." She walked into the office and placed the legal pad on the desk. 3 pages of small, neat handwriting. Dates, times, names, descriptions. The complete record of what silence had cost, laid out in ink on paper and offered forward without ceremony. Langston looked at the pages. He did not pick them up immediately. He looked at Elena Vargas. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. She did not look at Logan. Logan looked at the legal pad on the desk and understood with the specific and terrible finality that comes from watching a door close that there was nothing left to negotiate. Langston opened the top drawer of the desk and produced 2 sheets of paper already printed, already filled in. He placed them on the surface next to Elena's legal pad. Logan recognized the format before he read a single word. He had seen termination paperwork before from the other side of the desk. Twice in his years there, both times for junior staff, both times signed off by the general manager, without much ceremony. His name was at the top. "Effective today," Langston said. "Your access to the building and the systems will be revoked before you reach the parking lot. HR will contact you regarding the formal process." He paused. "I want to be clear about something, Logan. This is not a disciplinary measure. It is not a reprimand. It is the end of your employment here. There is a difference." Logan picked up the papers with hands that were not entirely steady. He looked at his name at the top of the page. He put the papers back down. "My uncle," he started. "Your uncle," Langston said, "does not work here." Logan left the office. His footsteps moved down the glass staircase slowly, and every person on the showroom floor below watched him cross toward the exit without speaking to anyone, without looking at Maya, without pausing at the desk where he had left his phone charger and a half-finished bottle of water earlier that day. The front door opened. The bell above it chimed, and Logan Pierce walked out into the Saturday morning and kept walking. Reed Harlan had been standing in the same spot on the showroom floor for some time. He had not been asked to leave. He had not been told to wait. He had simply stopped moving at some point after the handcuffs came off Maya's wrists, and his body had made the quiet, involuntary decision that staying still was safer than any direction he might choose to walk in. So he stood near the consultation table with his hands at his sides and his radio on his shoulder, and the growing corrosive awareness that the room around him had reorganized itself entirely. That the authority he had walked in with, which had felt as solid and as self-evident as the badge on his chest, had been quietly and completely redistributed to people who had not needed a uniform to carry it. Sergeant Lena Ortiz had been on her phone for the last several minutes, standing near the entrance with her back to the room, speaking in the low, precise cadence of someone relaying facts to someone else who was writing them down. When she ended the call, she put the phone in her pocket, turned around and walked directly to Harlan. She stopped in front of him. She did not position herself with aggression. She was not that kind of supervisor, and this was not that kind of moment. She stood at a professional distance and looked at him with an expression that was not unkind and was not forgiving, and was something more difficult than either. "Reed," she said. She used his first name deliberately, not to soften the blow, to make sure he understood that what was happening now was not procedural. It was real. "I need your badge and your weapon." Harlan looked at her. The request was not unexpected. He had known it was coming from the moment Langston ended his first phone call. But the knowing had not made it smaller. "Sarge, if I could just walk you through my reasoning at the time of the call." "I've seen the recordings," Ortiz said. 3 of them. They were sent to my phone in the last 10 minutes by people standing in this room. She paused. "I don't need your reasoning right now, Reed. I need your badge And your weapon. A customer near the front of the showroom. The elderly man who had been mid-sentence when Harlan first walked in, who had never quite found the thread of his conversation again, looked away, not in discomfort, in the particular kind of courtesy that some people extend to someone in the moment of losing something they cannot get back. Harlan reached up and unclipped his badge from his chest. He held it for a moment, 1 second, 2, looking at it the way people look at objects they have carried so long that the weight of them has become indistinguishable from their own weight. Then he placed it in Ortiz's hand. His weapon followed. He unholstered it with careful, practiced movements, cleared the chamber, engaged the safety, and handed it over, grip first. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He had expected them to shake, and they didn't. And somehow the steadiness was worse than shaking would have been, because it made the moment feel too calm, too manageable, too much like a procedure, and not enough like the thing it actually was. "You're relieved of duty effective now," Ortiz said, "pending a full external review of this incident and your prior use of force file. You'll receive formal notification of the review process at your address on file soon." She looked at him carefully. "Do you have someone who can drive you home?" "I have my car," Harlan said. "Reed, do you have someone who can drive you home?" He looked at her. He understood what she was asking, not logistically, but in the larger sense of the question, in the sense of whether there was a person who knew him well enough to be useful to him in the next several hours. He thought about it honestly, which was something he had not done in a while. "I'll call my brother," he said. "Good," Ortiz said. She walked away. She crossed the floor toward Langston and Maya, who were standing together near the GLE 45. Oh, the car that had started all of this, which was still sitting on its platform with the driver's side door closed, and its obsidian black finish catching the light in the particular way of a thing that has been waiting patiently to be part of a better story. Harlan stood alone. The consultation table was behind him. The front doors were ahead of him. The room was full of people who were no longer looking at him. Not from indifference, but from the decency of not watching a man stand in the wreckage of his own decisions any longer than was necessary. He thought about the multiple complaints. He had known about them. Of course he had. He had known about Dr. Reginald Foster, though he had not known the man's name at the time. He had known about the woman in the expensive coat, though he had also not known her name. He had known about a third incident that he thought of in the private accounting he sometimes conducted, late at night, as a misunderstanding, a word that had served him reasonably well as a container for things he preferred not to examine too closely. He thought about Maya Lennox standing with her spine straight and her hands visible and her voice level and refusing through all of it to become the thing that the situation had been designed to make her. He thought about the envelope in her pocket. He walked to the front doors and pushed through them into the Saturday morning. The air outside was warm and smelled like car exhaust and freshly cut grass from the median strip on Westfield Boulevard. He sat down on a low concrete planter near the entrance, took out his phone, and called his brother. The line rang 3 times. "Hey," his brother said. "What's up?" "Can you come get me?" Harlan said. "I'll explain when you get here." The video went live that same day. The man in the Georgia Tech sweatshirt, his name was Marcus Hayes, and he was a high school history teacher from Decatur who had come to Langston Luxury Motors to look at a used SUV for his wife. Had spent time after the incident sitting in his car in the parking lot watching the footage on his phone, deciding what to do with it. He was not someone who posted things on the internet for the satisfaction of posting them. He was someone who understood from years of teaching teenagers about the architecture of history that documentation mattered, that the difference between things that changed and things that didn't was very often simply whether there was a record. He posted it to 3 platforms simultaneously with a caption that was 11 words long. Black Army Colonel handcuffed at Atlanta dealership for buying a car. Within hours, it had been viewed hundreds of thousands of times. By evening, it had been viewed millions of times. By the next day, it had been viewed many millions of times, had been covered by numerous news outlets, and had generated a statement from the Atlanta Police Department acknowledging the incident and confirming that Officer Reed Harlan had been relieved of duty pending review. It had also generated a statement from the office of Councilman Victor Harlan, Logan's uncle, a city council member, whose district included the Westfield Boulevard corridor, expressing confidence in the police department's review process and offering his personal regrets to the affected individual. The statement was drafted by an aide, released that afternoon, and was received by the internet, with the specific, concentrated skepticism reserved for statements released on Saturday afternoons by politicians who have become tangentially associated with a story that is moving faster than they can manage. Councilman Harlan would spend the following week in a series of increasingly uncomfortable phone calls that he had not anticipated and could not control. That story belonged to a later chapter. A few days later, the Georgia Law Enforcement Oversight Commission convened a formal hearing. The hearing room was on the 4th floor of a state office building in downtown Atlanta. It had fluorescent lighting and institutional carpet and a long table at the front where the commission members sat. And it looked like every room in which consequential things are decided, deliberately, almost aggressively unremarkable, as though the gravity of what happened inside it needed no architectural assistance. General Everett Langston sat at the center of the commission table. To his left was a civil rights attorney named Claire Ellison. To his right was a retired federal judge named Theodore Langford, who had joined the commission the previous year and had in his first months developed a reputation for the kind of patient, methodical attention to detail that made people who had corners to cut deeply uncomfortable. Reed Harlan sat at the table facing them. He had not slept well. He was wearing a gray suit and had chosen it carefully that morning because it was the most neutral thing he owned, not the navy blue he wore to formal events, which felt like it was reaching for something, and not the casual clothes he would have worn at home, which felt like they were conceding something. The gray suit was a compromise that had not fully satisfied him. Across the room, Elena Vargas sat in the gallery. She had brought her legal pad. She had also brought a second document, a formal written statement prepared with the assistance of Langston's legal team over the weekend, that detailed both prior incidents she had witnessed. Her hands were folded on top of the pad. She was composed in the way that people who have made a difficult decision and committed to it are composed, not entirely comfortable, but no longer in conflict with themselves. The hearing began at the scheduled time. The video was shown first, several minutes of footage. The room watched in silence. When it ended, Judge Langford leaned forward and asked Harlan a single question. At the moment you applied the restraints, what was the specific articulable behavior that constituted the basis for detention? Harlan answered. His answer was careful and technically structured and referenced dispatch protocols and field assessment guidelines, and it took several minutes to deliver. When he finished, Langford looked at him for a long moment. "You've described a framework," he said. "I asked for a behavior." The multiple prior complaints were reviewed next. Each one had been resolved internally by Captain Raymond Holt, with a notation of no actionable finding. Holt sat in the gallery behind Harlan in a suit that fit him less well than his uniform did, and watched the commission read through the documentation with the expression of a man who has been asked to wait in a room where the temperature is slowly rising. Later in the hearing, Langston addressed the room. He spoke for several minutes. He did not use notes. He spoke about the responsibility of institutions, not in the abstract philosophical sense that makes people feel that a point is being made at them, but in the specific concrete sense of a man who had built something and understood that the thing he built carried an obligation that outlasted any single incident. He spoke about the years of the dealership. He spoke about what the name above the door was supposed to mean to every person who walked through it, regardless of what they looked like or what they were wearing, or what car they had parked in the lot outside. He spoke about Maya Lennox for under a minute. He did not describe what had happened to her. He described what kind of person she was and what she had given, and the specific indignity of what she had been asked to absorb in exchange for the simple act of trying to buy her mother a birthday present. The room was very quiet when he finished. Later that afternoon, the commission delivered its findings. Harlan terminated, effective immediately. Holt suspended, pending a full independent review of his case management record. The Atlanta PD directed to implement mandatory external oversight of all internal use of force complaint resolutions for a period of not less than 3 years. Outside in the corridor, Maya's attorney, Julian Price, was already on the phone. The civil courtroom of Judge Vivian Hale was on the 7th floor of the Fulton County Courthouse, and it smelled, as all courtrooms do, like old paper and central air conditioning, and the particular kind of institutional seriousness that accumulates in rooms where consequential things have been decided for a very long time. Judge Hale had been on the bench for many years. She was in her early 60s with close-cropped silver hair and reading glasses she wore on a chain around her neck, and a reputation well established and widely respected across the Atlanta legal community for a specific kind of impatience. Not with complexity, which she welcomed, but with evasion. She had no tolerance for answers that were constructed to avoid the question being asked, and she communicated this without raising her voice, which made it considerably more effective. The civil case of Lennox versus City of Atlanta and Langston Luxury Motors had been filed shortly after the incident. Julian Price, Maya's attorney, had submitted a complaint that ran to many pages and cited violations under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, as well as the Georgia Equal Access to Public Accommodations Act, which prohibited discrimination in places of business on the basis of race. The city's legal team had spent the intervening weeks attempting to negotiate a quiet resolution. They had proposed in sequence 3 different settlement figures. The first 2 had been declined. The third, accompanied by a formal written acknowledgement of civil rights violations, had been accepted, not because Maya needed the money, but because the written acknowledgement mattered. Because there was a difference between a number on a check and a sentence in a legal document that said in plain language that what happened was wrong and who was responsible for it. The portion of the case that proceeded to the courtroom concerned Logan Pierce and the civil claim of racial discrimination in a place of public accommodation. Logan sat at the defendant's table in a navy suit. He had lost weight in the weeks since his termination. Not dramatically, but visibly, in the way that stress distributes itself across a person's face and removes the comfortable certainty that used to live there. His attorney, a competent and thoroughly unremarkable man named Greg Patton, had advised him that the evidence was not favorable and that a negotiated resolution was almost certainly in his best interest. Logan had insisted on contesting it. He had told himself in the weeks between his termination and this morning a version of events in which he was a professional who had acted on reasonable concern, whose judgment had been catastrophically misread, whose career had been ended by a confluence of factors that had very little to do with who he actually was. He had told himself this story with the same commitment he had brought to every story he had ever constructed about himself, with conviction, with detail, and with the particular stubbornness of a man who had never been seriously required to examine the gap between his self-image and his behavior. Judge Hale had read Elena Vargas's testimony. She had reviewed the employment records that Langston's legal team had submitted, which showed the pattern of customer interactions Logan had conducted over his years there. Specifically, the documented instances where black customers had been asked for proof of funds before test drives, cross-referenced against the records of white customers who had not been asked the same question in the same period. Multiple instances over the years. Multiple black customers asked for documentation that was not required by dealership policy, that was not requested of comparable white customers, that served no legitimate business purpose beyond the expression of a presumption. The testimony took 1 day. Elena Vargas spoke for 40 minutes. Her voice was steady throughout. She did not editorialize. She stated what she had seen, the dates on which she had seen it, and the reasons she had not spoken sooner. That last part, the reasons she had not spoken sooner, was the part that cost her the most to say. And she said it anyway. because she had decided that the cost of honesty was something she could bear, and the cost of continued silence was something she could not. Maya testified for 25 minutes. She was in civilian clothes, a dark blazer over a cream blouse, her hair natural, her posture the same precise verticality it always was. She described the morning in the same methodical, sequential way she would describe a surgical procedure. Beginning, middle, each step accounted for, nothing omitted, nothing inflated. She described the check in her pocket. She described the car she had chosen for her mother. She described the sound the handcuffs made. She did not cry. She did not look at Logan. She spoke to Judge Hale, and Judge Hale listened with the full, uninterrupted attention she gave to testimony she found significant. When it was over, Judge Hale looked at her notes for a long moment. Then she looked at Logan. "Mr. Pierce," she said, "the record in this case reflects a consistent and documented pattern of treating black customers as presumptively less legitimate than white customers in identical circumstances. You made a phone call that resulted in a decorated military officer being placed in handcuffs while attempting to make a legal purchase. The evidence does not support the characterization of this as an isolated error in judgment. It supports the characterization of it as the predictable outcome of a habit." She paused. "Judgment for the plaintiff. Damages in the amount of $75,000. Additionally, pursuant to the court's authority under the Georgia Equal Access Act, you are prohibited from employment in any customer-facing sales role for a period of 3 years. The gavel came down. In the second row of the gallery, Evelyn Lennox, 70 years old in a couple of days, wearing a yellow dress she had bought specifically for this occasion, reached over and took her daughter's hand. Maya looked at her mother. Evelyn looked back at her with an expression that contained in the compressed and efficient language of a woman who had spent 38 years watching her daughter move through a world that did not always make room for her, everything that did not need to be said out loud. Outside in the corridor, a reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution asked Maya if she had a statement. She thought for a moment. "Tell people," she said, "that the check was already written. All I wanted was to give it to them." Hartsfield Jackson, Atlanta International Airport. Early one Tuesday morning had the particular quality of a place that exists outside of ordinary time, bright and relentless and full of people who are all in their various ways in the middle of becoming somewhere else. Maya moved through the terminal with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times and had long since made peace with the specific indignities of early morning travel. She had one carry-on and a duffel bag that weighed exactly what it was allowed to weigh. She had her boarding pass on her phone and her passport in the left interior pocket of her jacket. She had a coffee she had purchased at a kiosk near the entrance, and she was drinking it slowly, which was the only luxury the next many hours of travel would reliably afford her. She was in uniform. It was the first time in the weeks since the incident at the dealership that most of the people in her life had seen her in it. Her mother had seen it, of course. Evelyn Lennox had helped iron the jacket the previous evening, standing at the ironing board in the kitchen, with the careful, unhurried attention she brought to every task she considered important, pressing each crease with the deliberateness of someone who understood that the details of a thing were where its meaning lived. But outside of that kitchen, outside of that house, this was the first morning she had put it on and walked into a public space. The eagle on her shoulder, the bronze star on her chest, the Army Commendation Medal beside it, and the others in their precise, regulated order, each one a coordinate on the map of 14 years. The uniform was olive green and fit her exactly as it should, and she wore it the way she wore everything, without announcement, without performance, as though it were simply the accurate description of who she was. General Everett Langston was waiting near the security checkpoint. He had not told her he was coming. He had sent a message the previous evening that said only, "I'll be there at 6." And she had read it, and not replied, Because she did not need to. She had understood when she saw him that he was not there to say anything in particular. He was there the way certain people are present at certain moments. Not because their presence resolves anything, but because it acknowledges something, and the acknowledgement matters. He was in the same khaki pants and a different polo shirt. Dark blue this time. And he looked exactly as he always looked, like a man who had spent decades learning that the room adjusts to you, not the other way around. He looked at her in the uniform for a moment. "You look like yourself," he said. "I always do," she said. He smiled. It was a brief smile, contained but genuine in the way of smiles that are not performed for anyone's benefit. "How's your mother?" "She drove the GLE to church on Sunday," Maya said. "She called me afterward to tell me that 3 people in the parking lot asked her about it. She said she told all 3 of them. It was a gift from her daughter." "As it should be," Langston said. They stood together for a moment in the current of the terminal, people moving around them in both directions, rolling bags and strollers, and the particular focused energy of early morning travelers who have somewhere to be. "The foundation," Langston said. "Julian tells me the paperwork cleared recently." Maya confirmed. "The Lennox Foundation, incorporated under Georgia law, funded with the full settlement from the city's agreement, supplemented by a contribution from Langston that she had argued against and eventually accepted. Its stated purpose was the provision of legal support and advocacy services to individuals who had experienced racial discrimination in places of public accommodation. Its first intake coordinator, a sharp-minded recent law school graduate named Tamara Cole, had started the previous week. "She handled it better than I would have," Langston said. It was unclear whether he meant Tamara or Maya or Evelyn, perhaps all 3. "You handled it the way it needed to be handled," Maya said. "You came in." He looked at her. "You were already handling it." "Yes," she said. "But there are rooms that change faster when someone like you walks in. That's not an indictment. It's a fact. And the question isn't whether that's fair. The question is what people who understand it decide to do with it." Langston was quiet for a moment. Outside, through the tall windows of the terminal, the Atlanta sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, that specific transitional gray that precedes the first real color of morning. "Take care of yourself over there," he said. "I take care of everyone else," she said. "I'm very good at it." She picked up her duffel bag. She extended her hand. He took it with the same grip he had given her 20 years ago, when she graduated, when she pinned on her first rank, when she came back from her first deployment. Looking older in the way that the first deployment always ages people, not in years, but in the particular weight they carry afterward. She walked toward the checkpoint. She did not look back, not because the moment behind her didn't matter, but because the direction she was moving in mattered more, and she had always understood the difference. The security line parted slightly as she approached. A TSA officer looked up, registered the uniform, and gave a small professional nod. She returned it. She placed her duffel on the conveyor belt. She put her coffee cup in the bin. She walked through the scanner, collected her things on the other side, and kept moving. In a few days she would be back at Landstuhl. In a week, she would be back in surgery. The world that needed her was waiting, as it always was, with the same relentless and unambiguous demand, and she had never once failed to answer it. Behind her in the terminal, the morning light came through the windows and fell across the floor in long, warm panels. And in the parking lot of Langston Luxury Motors on Westfield Boulevard, the first customer of the day, a black woman in her 50s in a neat wool coat and sensible shoes, moving with the unhurried purpose of someone who knows what she wants and has come to get it, pushed through the glass doors. 3 salesmen stepped forward to meet her. Dignity is not something a badge can strip away or a pair of handcuffs can contain. Colonel Maya Lennox walked into that showroom knowing exactly who she was, and she walked out the same person. The uniform was always there. The check was always written. What changed was simply who finally chose to see her. If this story stayed with you, Drop your city in the comments and tell us why. And if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, subscribe. We'll keep telling the stories that matter.